Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to How Did We Get Here? The podcast where we just try to make your life better and give you information to make great decisions. Today, another tough one. We're going to talk about trauma. And of course, talking about trauma, you know how I got her back. She back. Miss Della.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I am Della Roderick. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland and the founder of August Rose Health Center Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services.
Yeah, see, so I'm giving y'all a real professional, not somebody that talks about it, don't really know about it. No, this lady is certified. She's a certified therapist, and daggone it, she can help you. So let me read y'all some very disturbing things I've read and found out about trauma. We deal with facts, not opinions. Here's a fact. 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their life. That's 223 million people. That's a lot. That's a big number. 70% of adults. 61% are men. 51% are women. Here's the other disturbing thing I read. 35 million kids aged 0 to 17. Nearly 50% of the American kids are exposed to trauma. Mm-hmm. And that trauma is called, as you know, Ms. Della, is called adverse childhood experience, called ACE, that can severely harm their future. Here's something really disturbing. A study said that 6 or more of these adverse childhood experiences can lower someone's life expectancy by nearly 20 years. Mm-hmm. 20 years. Not 20 minutes, 20 years. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. And the stresses are traumatic events stemming from abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and toxic stress. I'm going to say that's disturbing, and it's no surprise why we are where we are in this United States in particular, but in the world. That means to me, we have a lot of trauma that has not been dealt with. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the manifestation of that. And then, of course, you throw in the pandemic, which, again, if you're already on the edge, that pushed you over the edge. And people can't come back from that or haven't come back from that for a multitude of reasons. Mm-hmm. So I was like, that's something we need to talk about. I had to bring on my girl, Miss Della. I had to ask the questions. So the first question I'm going to ask you, what exactly is trauma?
Scary statistics, right?
Yes.
Literally, trauma and stress can shorten your life by decades. But to answer the question, trauma is an emotional response to a triggering event. So, or it can be a single incident, like a car accident, or it can be incidences or experiences through years, right? That causes emotional responses and have a psychological impact. But I will also then say that just because you experience stress does not necessarily mean you're experiencing trauma.
Great point. Because again, things start to meld into each other. Does this turn into depression? Does it turn into PTSD? Because we're dealing with a lot of different terms, but we gotta be clear that stress does not lead you to certain things like suicide or anything else. So we make that clear. Mm-hmm. But wow, that's amazing though. I mean, to know that, that many people, 7 out of every 10 person going through some traumatic experience. That's scary.
And let me also then say, like I was mentioning, the single incident, like a car accident, but then also chronic series of unfortunate events, if you will, like child abuse can be not just one incident. It could be over your early childhood. Child neglect can also cause trauma. Bullying in our schools, we know, our youth are really experiencing in-person bullying, but then also virtual bullying. Physical abuse also causes trauma, domestic violence, not just war. Sometimes individuals feel like, oh, I don't have trauma because I have never been to war. I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD. So I don't experience trauma, but you can. Natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina was a traumatizing event. Like you mentioned, COVID was incredibly traumatizing for the world, right? So we are
Absolutely.
actually you can actually experience trauma throughout periods of time, not just one single incident.
That's a great point because people would think like, you suck it up. And you hear that a lot. Oh, you went through that, I'll just suck it up. You'll be all right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like which they kind of discount your experience, discount your
Mm-hmm.
trauma. Like, oh, I've had it worse. I mean, I don't think we should be comparing trauma. My trauma's worse than your trauma. It's like
Mm-hmm.
trauma is still trauma. And if you don't really deal with it, it has a long lasting effect.
It
So
sure
it's
can.
crazy.
So there's, for example, acute trauma, which is one incident that kind of you need to unpack and process. Chronic trauma, like domestic violence over that period of time, or complex trauma, CPTSD, where it's a multiple traumatic event. So you get into the car accident, you may be abused by a significant other, experience medical trauma as well, and natural disasters, things along those lines, where there's complex traumatic events that have occurred throughout your lifetime. So it's not just kind of a one-off either, but every person can experience multiple types of trauma throughout their individual lifetime in their individual journey, right? So there is no comparison. One person's trauma isn't more or less than another person's trauma. It is about that person's individual experience and how they individually responded to the events in their life.
Oh, cool. See, and that's why I make that point because you've heard it. You
Mm-hmm.
heard it. We heard it. I heard growing up. This happened to you. Oh, I had something worse to me, and make you feel like, wow, I fell off a house and almost killed myself. So I guess I must. I'm gonna brush that off. No,
Mm-hmm.
I got hit by a car and bounced off the road 3 or 4 times. I survived. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I should complain about my trauma because it's
Like
sad, but
somebody got it worse. We always kind of say that, right? Like somebody else has it worse than you, but you have your own unique journey in this world, right? So your
exactly,
experiences, your emotions, your responses are absolutely valid. And one is
exactly,
not worse than other. And so I always tell individuals, like, don't minimize what your human experience is. Don't minimize it. You have you have valid experiences that do need to be unpacked, and you're worthy of healing as well. Just because someone else their story may be different than yours doesn't mean that yours is less than.
exactly. And that's a great point. And I think the other question I want to ask you is, what does trauma do to a person?
Hmm. So trauma can cause a series of things, but it can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. So it can come in flashbacks or nightmares, severe anxiety. It can be uncontrollable thoughts. It just really depends on how you are responding emotionally and then also behaviorally. So emotionally, like I was saying, you may experience the anxiety, the depression, the hopelessness. You may disassociate. You may notice changes in your attitude or your worldview after experiencing some trauma. You may also experience mood swings, some level of guilt and shame for some individuals. So that's kind of your emotional side, right?
Hmm.
But then you'll also notice with individuals who experience some traumatic events, changes in their schedule. For example, they may avoid going to certain places that remind them or trigger that traumatic experience. They may avoid, if they, for example, were in a car accident, they may avoid driving, or experience panic attacks while they're driving, or They may also experience dizziness and nausea, or become more tense around individuals. For example, you may notice a child that is physically abused or has a history of being physically abused. They become tense, or you know, um, they'll tense up when an adult comes to talk to them, or they avoid eye contact, even an experience body aches. It's just really individual what that individual can experience after
Wow.
a traumatic event.
Wow. That's crazy, but that's true.
Mhm,
Um, Especially when you know certain things. For instance, we talk about generational trauma and that type of stuff. And you can see kids or adults who went through things and they're never we always say the term they're not quite right. And that's kind of say, well, they've gone through some things and they just act differently. Like you said, it's a different thing. They avoid people. They're not as talkative. They have certain mannerisms. It's like they live differently, and they live kind of. I don't want to say scared, fearful. I think is the word I'm looking for. It's like they don't step outside whatever their comfort zone is. And they don't talk a lot because
mhm,
you talk to some people who've gone through some trauma. They don't want to talk.
mhm,
It's kind of like you're like, well, how you doing? Fine. Like, can you give me more? But they don't want to because it's almost like they feel like by talking more to you that they expose themselves or they expose their trauma or their hurt or whatever.
mhm,
Um, and that's unfortunate because again, people look at trauma and I think we talked about in a previous podcast. They want to pray it away.
mm,
The term leave it on the altar. Leave it with whatever you follow.
mm,
And I always say, we talk all the time offline about it's more than that. It's
mm,
more than just leave it on the altar and then it'll magically disappear.
mm.
But does trauma magically disappear?
Oh, I think that trauma can alter a person's day to day, similar to what you were saying a few moments ago, where there's changes behaviorally and emotionally and on their general outlook or thought processes about the day to day world. And so I think prayer can be a useful tool to help that person unpack and process what they're going through. I think that there are additional tools and resources like individual counseling, like medication management if needed, depending on the
Hmm.
severity of symptoms. Like, for example, some individuals may experience nightmares, and so, or they're struggling to go to sleep, so they may benefit post trauma. They may benefit from incorporating a sleep aid of some sort, or you
Hmm.
may notice a change. They may notice a change in their appetite. They may even experience sexual dysfunction, like erectile dysfunction, and so on. So, or even on the other side of it, increased fatigue since experiencing trauma, because you go into these different states like hyper and hypoarousal as you're navigating your triggers or your traumatic experiences. And so I think that prayer can be a useful tool. I think that there are other tools that can be integrated into an individual's spiritual life to help them cope with their new normal.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because again, I want this to be a holistic thing, not just, do this or do that. It should
Mm-hmm.
be you should look at anything and everything is going to help you get over the hump. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people really don't deal with trauma, especially when you talk about kids, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sad, to see that half the kids go through this kind of trauma and if they don't really work it out, it manifests itself into adults who are making very risky decisions in their
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Mm. It absolutely can. Like the unhealthy coping skills, you may see an increase in substance use, substance abuse, substance misuse, increase in alcoholism, even other addictions like gambling addiction is something. So when you unfortunately, when you experience a traumatic event or a series of events, you may inadvertently be at increased risk for developing other behavioral health diagnoses like depression,
Wow.
anxiety, personality disorders. It puts you at increased risk. Now, that does not mean that because you experience a traumatic event or a series of events that you now will have this mental health diagnosis, but it puts you at increased risk. It's similar to like if you eat and you don't exercise, you're at increased risk for gaining weight and potentially becoming obese and so on, right? Or
Absolutely.
similar to if you sit outside in the sun too long, you are at and don't put on any SPF, you're at a risk for a sunburn, right? That doesn't mean you'll
Absolutely.
get a sunburn, but that does mean that you are at increased risk. So similar when it comes to mental health and stressors, you experience stressors that may put you at increased risk. It does not necessarily mean it will happen and you'll
Hmm.
end up with a behavioral health diagnosis, but it can put you at increased risk for developing other behavioral health diagnoses or addictions and so on.
Okay. Yeah. And again, that's because people aren't really having a conversation with a Miss Della. I can pick a phone
Mhm,
and say, "Hey, Della, I'm going through some things," and you're
mhm,
like, "Okay, yeah, okay, talk me through it."
mhm.
Most people don't, unfortunately, know people like that, and
Yeah.
so they kind of self-medicate or you know,
Self-soothe. Mm-hmm.
exactly, and because that's all they know. Because
Mm-hmm.
think about it, nobody talks about mental health or trauma in families.
No.
Think about it, nobody talks about that. You just kind of like you go through it. They don't know how to deal with it, so they can't pass down the knowledge of how they deal with it. They just say, "I dealt with it," and
Mm-hmm.
you need to deal with it. So that
Mm-hmm.
means you carry that burden, and
Mm-hmm.
now you just pass on to the next generation, which is I call that generational trauma. Now I may be wrong by saying that, but as just like your grandfather used to do the same thing. Your grandfather drank, your great grandfather drank. Now I drink, and then you can drink, and then you pass on to your kid, but
Mm-hmm.
you're still drinking, but you're still not dealing with the issues that you're dealing with. And as I said in the beginning, you're cutting your life expectancy down by
Mm-hmm.
drinking and using drugs and that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we got to do better, and that goes up to my next question: what type of coping mechanisms, uh, strategies should people use? If they don't know, they don't have a Miss Della on the speed dial, and they're like, "What the hell? How do I cope with this until I can finally get some help? What do I need to do?"
Mm-hmm. So say you're on your healing journey and you realize, hold on, I've experienced a whole bunch of traumatic events. Um, yes, the car accident, but then also job losses, COVID. Say you were also in Hurricane Katrina, um, grief issues where you've had several family members pass away, and you are noticing a level of numbness. Within you, or you're noticing that you're starting to think about the world a little differently and so on. You're noticing you're not quite who you used to be. Now I would always recommend calling your insurance agency, that 1-800 number on the back of your insurance card, to figure out who is a therapist in your network or a psychiatrist in your network. But before all of that, or in the meantime, until you get your appointment, it's really important to implement proper self-care activities, eating a balanced meal, getting a regular sleep pattern routine, practicing mindfulness and relaxation techniques, deep breathing, grounding techniques, making sure that even the music that you're listening to is healthy for your mental health and your mental state, right?
That's a lot
Um,
today, especially with the music that's now out here. It's like, oh my God, I don't know how you stay sane to some of this music they got out here now.
it is. It is a lot. It is a lot. Music can be therapeutic. Music can be a therapeutic tool, but also being mindful of the type of music that you're listening to, and is that music really good for your emotional state? Does it make you feel worse? Does it make you feel more aggressive or angry? Like, gonna just, being mindful of that. But music is an awesome tool as well. But then also other stress management strategies in your day-to-day that can help you navigate when you're having triggering moments, or you're experiencing more anxiety in that moment until you get to a therapist.
Okay, cool. Now, the last question I'm gonna ask you is for the babies. I love the babies. And to see this disturbing 35 million kids, 50% of our kids are going through this. If a young kid is watching this, and they're going through some things, what are your suggestions to them to do?
Let an adult know. I know that sometimes letting a safe adult know. I know it's hard to find an adult that is a safe person to talk to. And if you don't have anyone absolutely at all to talk to, there is the National Crisis Hotline number. It's 988. And it is 24 hours a day. And you can pick up that phone, even if you are not suicidal, but you can pick up that phone and talk to a counselor on speed dial, essentially. And they will help you navigate that tough moment that you are in. But in the meantime, also just finding a safe adult in your day-to-day. It could be your school counselor, it could be your neighbor, it could be someone you feel comfortable with, a coach at your school that you can talk to. You can also do some journaling exercises, but also letting your parent or your parents know, hey, I'm not feeling quite right. I would like someone to talk to, and hopefully they're able to get you connected to a counselor.
Oh my God, that's great information. It really is. And I'm looking at the kids. Listen to your uncle. Listen to your auntie. Find help. There's no need to suffer in silence. You don't need to suffer in silence. Just find help and get help, because we love you. We want you to be successful. We want you to live a long, healthy life. And we all have gone through some sort of trauma, and we're here to support you. So I just want to say that. And, Miss Della, you're always a founder of information. You are my go-to. You are the mental health guru. Listen, if you're in Maryland, how do we get in touch with you, Miss Della?
So I own August Rose House Center, and we are located in Glen Burnie, Maryland. Our phone number is 410-412-7791. You can call us up and get an appointment with myself or another one of our PRP counselors, or you can visit us on our website at www.augustrosehousecenter.com. I also have all the social medias, the Instagram, the LinkedIn, and the Facebook, and so on. But you can give us a call Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., or even send us an email at customercare@augustrose.com, and we'll respond.
Girl, I appreciate that. And listen, people, I'm going to have it on our website too. I'm going to have at the end of this podcast. In fact, I'll always promote her. So you can go follow everything on my website. You'll see it. And again, we're here to help. This entire podcast is about making you better. It's about making sure that you get out the darkness and you find happiness and light in your life. And that's important to us. It's a legacy. We're trying to build a legacy. It's conversations that I never had growing up. Ms. Della, I'm pretty sure you probably didn't have that many conversations growing up either.
No.
We find this out the hard way. We had to go through the struggle. We had to go through the lumps and bumps and scars and everything to get here. So I don't want you guys to go through what we had to go through to get to where we are. We're here to pass this information on to you, and once you get it, you keep passing on to other people, because there's a lot of people out there like you.
Yes. let's normalize the conversation around mental health services. Everyone has mental health. Everyone does not have mental illness. And so it's important to open up the dialogue. That's why I'm so appreciative of being back on and continuing to be invited back on your podcast so we can normalize the conversation around mental health and get individuals the support and services that they need.
Exactly. And peoples, like I said, we talked about trauma. We've been talking about some other things that we're kicking around now, but we're here to help you. We're here to make you better. Mm-hmm. And you know what? You guys know what you need to do. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, get all this beautiful information, and sit here and listen to Miss Della with her very talented self tell you how to make your life better. And you know I'm gonna always bring it to you. Like, hey, raw and straight to the point, because I want y'all to be healthy. I want y'all to do better and be better. Mm-hmm. You know, so with that, we're going to end this particular podcast and this particular episode of How Do We Get Here? And until next time, people, take care of yourself. Take care of your mentals. Peace.
Bye.